Okay, it appears that we are now live, so welcome to anybody who's at home watching the Committee of the Whole meeting, which I believe is the last Committee of the Whole meeting for this council. I'll call the meeting to order and look to the agenda. Are there errors or omissions to the agenda? Ms. DeSoto?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. No errors or omissions, but just wanted the Committee of the Whole to be aware that I will be providing a COVID-19 update during the administrative update portion of the meeting.
Great, thank you. I don't think we need to amend the agenda for that, but just an observation. With that, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented then. Those in favor? And opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Looking then to the minutes of the Committee of the Whole of Tuesday, June 15th, are there errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? And opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move into the first report, item D1, Three Sisters Mountain Village Properties, Smith Creek ASP and Three Sisters Village ASP appeals and litigation. Mr. Driedzik.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Adam Driedzik, Town Solicitor. So this is a 20-minute section. There's a large written briefing with all of the court documents attached, and our external legal counsel, Kelsey Becker Brooks from Reynolds Mirth Richard and Farmer LLP, I believe, is hoping to join us. So I'll be fairly brief and follow the written report. This concerns the Smith Creek ASP and the Three Sisters Village ASP, both which were brought to council and heard together earlier in the spring of 2021. Both defeated Three Sisters Mountain Village Properties Limited, requested mediation. The town declined. So we now have a number of appeals and judicial reviews to respond to. There are two appeals, both brought under the Municipal Government Act, both brought to the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, which I'm going to just call the tribunal for short. One for each of the two ASPs, both arguing that the town should be required to adopt those ASPs on the basis that they comply with the 1992 NRCB decision, both relying on Section 619 of the Municipal Government Act. So those two notices of appeal and the town's responses to each of those two appeals are attached to the report. There was a preliminary hearing on the first of those, the Smith Creek ASP appeal. That occurred on September 3rd, and we have a decision order from the tribunal that lays out some next steps. So the next step is that there'll be another preliminary hearing on September 30th. That will serve to open the proceedings on the Three Sisters Village ASP. So we'll then have two live appeals. That hearing on the 30th will also be used to consider whether intervener status should be granted to any further parties. And there are at least three potential intervener applications of which I'm aware of. One from Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, one from Stoney and Nakota Nations, and then a request letter from the NRCB asking that it reserve the right to be involved in a more limited capacity if issues arise that concern its jurisdiction. So the other thing that will happen at that September 30th hearing is that the tribunal will consider whether jurisdictional arguments should be heard separately in advance of the main hearings on the merits of the appeal. So if you go to the appeal notices and the town's response, a number of the town's points of response concern questions of law, and the issue is whether those should be heard in advance. Then the third thing that will happen on that date is the tribunal will consider whether those two ASP appeals should be consolidated or heard sequentially, one after the other. In either event, we're expecting that the full hearings will take approximately 3 weeks and occur in February of 2022. So that's the status of the LPRT, the tribunal proceedings. As to the 2 judicial reviews, these are separate legal proceedings. They're filed into the Court of Queen's Bench, and they're currently adjourned to no set date. So no further update from me other than the originating applications in the materials. Council has no active role in these legal proceedings. We're not expecting that there will be any decisions of council required before the municipal elections in October. However, these are decisions of council that the town is having to respond to through these proceedings. So we do anticipate that there will be decisions of new council to be made depending on steps to be taken and the outcome of the legal proceedings. In terms of financial impact, again, uncertain at this early stage, but could become significant over the course of multiple years. Expenditures incurred through responding to litigation and appeals should be in an operating budget or an interim operating budget or otherwise approved by council. So given that the main proceedings may not occur until 2022 and that expenses of this nature fall outside of the town's general legal budget for ongoing annual matters, the administration is intending to come to council with some proposals for costs and offsetting revenue sources as part of the 2022 budget approvals later on in this calendar year. As far as stakeholder engagement, these are legal proceedings, so that's within the jurisdiction of the decision makers, the tribunal and the court. But we would be looking at a much narrower range of participation than would be the case with council hearings because the issues themselves will be narrower. So the tribunal for those statutory appeals is not required to hear from persons other than the town and the applicant. But as I mentioned, they are inviting intervener applications. So we expect that there'll be some formal screening to determine whether further persons should be granted a status and the scope of that participatory role. Very similar in the courts, the court orders that have adjourned these proceedings have involved a requirement to issue notice to a number of persons, the MD Bighorn, Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the NRCB, and to post notice of proceedings in the local newspapers. Those notices were posted by the applicant in the proceedings, and they've already run in the earlier months of this year. That is really the extent of my submissions. Miss Becker Brooks from Reynolds Mirth Richard Farmer is hopefully in the waiting room. And I would advise council that, she's actually on the screen.
She's actually right there in front of us.
Then I will cede the floor. But my final advice to council is that if any of the communications involve the giving or receiving of legal advice, that those are privileged and should occur in camera. So thank you for your time.
Is that really going to be your last advice for council?
Well, hopefully not the course of my tenure with the town. But in terms of this 20-minute section, yes, you should take your opportunity to meet with your external. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So welcome, Ms. Becker Brooks. And by all means, if you have anything that you were preparing to speak to council about, that'd be great to hear from you.
Sure. I mean, Adam's done a really good job of going over where we are at the current time with the kind of 4 appeals that are happening at the same time. For each of the ASPs, there's been an appeal to the LPRT and there's been a judicial review application brought. While those judicial review applications are on the back burner right now, it is definitely a belt and suspenders approach. The idea being that we would pursue or deal with or address the LPRT appeals first, And once those are decided, then there's the possibility of those judicial review applications being pursued further. It's unlikely they would be pursued if, of course, the LPRT appeals are successful. It's more likely that they would be pursued if the LPRT appeals are unsuccessful. And a number of the issues raised in the judicial review would, I suppose, theoretically have been dealt with in the LPRT appeals, though the court wouldn't be bound by those decisions. So it would be interesting to see where those judicial reviews would go. But for now, I think you can kind of put those on the side and not think too much about those and focus on the LPRT appeals, because that'll be plenty to focus on for the next little while. I know that some of you did attend the first preliminary hearing on the Smith Creek ASP for the LPRT, so you have a bit of an idea. I'm only going to talk in acronyms, just letters, no words. You'll have a better idea of kind of what the process looks like. That was a preliminary hearing. It was just before one member of the tribunal. Normally they sit 3 or 5 members of the tribunal, but for preliminary matters, they do have a process whereby the quorum can be 1. So it was just 1 member who sat, and it was obviously procedural issues that were dealt with. Adam's given you a really good overview of what the next steps would be. The one thing that I would mention is that in the board order, some filing deadlines are coming up as well. So we will be filing on behalf of the town our submissions on the jurisdictional issue of whether or not, on the preliminary issue on whether or not the jurisdictional questions, the first 2 questions that are set out in each of the responses to the appeals, whether those should be dealt with in advance separately from the merits hearing. The merits hearing is where we would get into the actual substance of applying Section 619 to this particular ASP and this particular NRCB decision. The jurisdictional questions that I've referred to, the first 2 are more purely legal questions, and that's the basis upon which we've asked that they be dealt with separately in advance. If anybody has any experience sitting on the SDAB, you'll recall that sometimes what happens is there's a jurisdictional question that needs to be decided in advance. The idea being, do we even have the ability to hear this appeal? So it's similar to that situation. So those submissions will be filed on Friday. I think I would probably just open the floor to questions right now. I don't think I have anything more that I need to add as far as what the next steps are and where we are at this stage. But as Adam mentioned, if we want to get into a little bit more detail on actual legal advice or legal strategy or approach, then we should go in camera.
Great, thanks very much. I do have a question just for better understanding, and I'm not sure if you may have both touched on it, but still not clear in my own mind. So the intervener status is something that applies to the tribunal, and they're obliged to at least consider intervener status, but they're not obliged to grant it. Is that correct?
Correct. So the board has set up a process whereby parties who are interested in being interveners, having a role in the LPR, a recognized role, I guess, in the LPRT appeals, that they would apply for intervener status, that parties would have the opportunity to respond to that, and then the board would make a decision. And that basically comes out of this section in the Municipal Government Act, Section 619 sub 6, which talks about the LPRT not being required to notify or hear from any person other than the applicant and the municipality against whom the appeal is launched. There would be kind of a parallel process on the judicial reviews in the courts when it comes to parties applying to be interveners in legal actions, but that would be governed by the court process, and it would be a separate process.
But there is a process then if there was anybody that wanted to represent or to present to the court for the judicial review, there is a process whereby they can apply to be heard?
Yes.
Okay.
which was theoretically part of the reason that the court directed that notice of the judicial review applications be given and were given specifically to some parties and then more generally as well.
Great, thank you. I'll have a question that I think might be better in camera, but let's continue with the out of in camera questions. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman, and thank you, Ms. Becker-Brooks and Mr. Dudzik for attending. I have two questions, actually. The first question is, I noticed that in page 6 of the report under judicial review, there's a piece here that says, basically, section 619 of the MGA and are seeking court orders requiring the town to approve the ASPs. So would that mean that the application, if this were seen through to this point, that the application would then be brought back to the sitting council of the day and the council of the day would be forced to approve it? Or would it just be rubber stamped by admin? Have you ever seen anything like this in play before?
So under the that's a very good point, I guess, is that even the LPRT at their hearing said, haven't had one of these in a long time.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, their processes aren't even, the
fine.
letters they used in their processes aren't necessarily specific to 619 appeals because they're just really uncommon.
But it's also how it's worded in the MGA as well. It's not that yeah. So I was just curious how that might play out or could play out.
Right. I mean, the way that it's worded in the MGA 619 sub 8 is that the LPRT can order the municipality to amend the statutory plan or land use bylaw in order to comply or dismiss the appeal. So either they dismiss the appeal or they order the municipality. And, you know, they do use the term municipality. I don't know of any authority that's looked at this, but and one might argue that that would mean administration because they've used council in other places.
I know.
But in this case, the only body in a municipality which can amend or adopt a statutory plan or land use bylaw is council.
Yeah.
So I think the reason they've used that broader phrase of municipality is because this section 619 covers not only ASPs, it covers any statutory plan, land use bylaw, subdivision decision, or development decision. So sometimes it would be the subdivision authority, sometimes it would be the development authority. And we do have from that one 619 case in Paint Earth that municipality here includes the SDAB, even though we have other cases that says the SDAB is a separate entity from the municipality, of course, because it's independent. So that's what the section says. I suppose it would be up to the LPRT to interpret that section, but if we look at it in the context of the rest of section 619.
Okay. And then my second question is, I find it really quite interesting that the NRCB want to be an intervener. I actually figured that since this newer body had been created, that they had been absorbed into that like the Borg, but not. So do you have any comments on that at all? Is that something strange to you or is that typical?
I think that's something that should be discussed in camera.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks. We'll talk about that. We'll make a little parking lot of these items.
Okay.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Ms. Becker-Brooks, I just wanted to ask what the process was for advising the interveners or inviting interveners. Was that the 2 newspaper submissions that were in the Rocky Mountain Outlook?
As far as being interveners for the LPR, so the notice in the newspaper was as a result of the judicial review applications. Mm-hmm. The notice as far as the LPRT to potential interveners was, my understanding, a direct email from the LPRT based on information that the party provided on who they thought was interested. Adam, do you have anything to add to that? That's how I understood it.
That's my understanding as well.
So it was 2 separate ways of contacting people to let them know that there was an opportunity for interveners?
The court proceedings and the LRPT proceedings are completely separate legal proceedings. So the court order required the applicant to publish notice in the newspaper and notify a list of specific entities. And then the LPRT has its own process for identifying interested persons.
Thank you.
There are other questions, Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I'm just confirming that there is no role for the council of Canmore Council to play. This is all going to play out in the courts between the various parties. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, I suppose the role of council would be to potentially provide direction to administration on legal matters, but this isn't. And this was something that at the LPRT preliminary hearing on the Smith Creek ASP was made very clear by Three Sisters, and it's acknowledged by us. This isn't another public hearing into whether or not these ASPs should be adopted or not. This is in some ways a very distinct legal question on whether or not the ASPs are consistent and comply with the NRCB decision. That's going to require a lot of substantive evidence and discussion on what those say. But really, at the end of the day, this is a legal argument on what those words mean. And it is, we already have those ASPs that were not adopted. We already have the NRCB decision, and we're working with those. We're not revisiting what's in them.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that for me.
Are there other questions that can be heard out of in camera? Ms. DeSoto?
I just wanted, if I may, to add an extra point to Councillor Comfort's question or point of response, and that would be there may be future decisions of future councils based on the outcomes of these, of both the LPRT hearing and the judicial reviews. For example, the town may choose to appeal a decision depending on which way the decision went, and that would be something administration would seek guidance from council on. So while we don't anticipate council involvement in these initial hearings, that there may be future decisions.
Great, thank you. I mean, look to the municipal clerk for the rule under FOIP that would apply to going in camera this time to take legal advice or interpretation.
Bet I wasn't quite prepared for your question, but 2 seconds here.
Yeah, I
Would
should
be-
have prepared you for that. But
That's okay. I could hear that you were going in camera. I could have looked it up earlier. So you are going to be looking at under FOIP 23. Oh, sorry, no. (27) sub 1 A. Information that is subject to any type of legal privilege. And I'm also not exactly ready for you to go in camera yet either. So 2 seconds, please.
okay, all right. Are there any other questions that councillors may have while we're not in camera? So we'll just pause for a moment while municipal clerk does her thing.
I have a, Mayor Borman?
Yeah, Ms. DeSoto?
Yes, I'm just wondering if Ms. Becker-Brooks could comment on the length of the hearing. So Mr. Driedzik indicated that the LPRT is potentially setting aside 3 weeks. And the town was involved in a municipal government board hearing a few years back. And our experience at that time was, even though we had a week-long hearing, they didn't close the hearing at the end of that week and took 10 or 11 months to actually close the hearing. Is that something that you've seen and we might be able to anticipate, or How do these things normally play out procedurally?
Well, at the last preliminary hearing, the 2 weeks, and in discussions that I had had with council previously, the 2 weeks was suggested when we were only talking about the Smith Creek ASP, based on the last time, basically this similar issue was going to go before the LPRT many years ago, or the MGB at the time. And it was 2 weeks that were set aside then, and that was the number that we went with. And I don't think that that's unreasonable. And I think that if the Smith Creek ASP and the Three Sisters Village ASP are going to be heard kind of one after another, so that there can be some sharing of evidence. So evidence from one of the appeals can be used in the other appeal, so that you don't have to, go through the whole NRCB decision twice and say the exact same things about it. That it makes sense to look at kind of 3 weeks. So instead of two-week hearings, if we combine them, maybe it's going to be 3 weeks. My experience with the LPRT is that that there are often a number of preliminary steps, and that they're always documented by board orders. I know that they do that sometimes, keep the hearing open at the end. The reason for that, of course, is if they want to come back and seek additional information from the parties, or clarify a point, or come back and hear from another witness again. Keeping it open allows them to do that. It really depends on the circumstances. There's going to be, a lot of evidence put forward, particularly by Three Sisters in this appeal. So it is going to take a lot of time. It's going to be dense from a planning perspective. You all know this stuff like the back of your hands, I can tell, from the public hearings and reviewing the minutes. But, those board members aren't going to, and it is going to take some time to present that information to them by all the parties, and get them up to speed on the issues in your town and the issues with respect to this particular area for development. So I guess I didn't really answer your question. That is an approach that I've seen done in the past. I think there's 2 points for that. Some might say 3 weeks seems too long or unnecessary. It's far better to have too many days set down for a hearing and then not need them all, than not be able to finish and try and find days that works for everybody. So I do agree with that approach, even if it maybe is on the long end. It will be up to the board on what process they adopt when it comes to keeping it open at the end, and it will also be up to the board on how long it takes them to release a decision. So, they do say they will give a written decision within 30 days have to commence the hearing within 60 days, and they have to give a written decision within 30 days after concluding the hearing. But there is some authority out there that for these kinds of administrative hearings, there actually isn't any consequence if it's not filed, if it's a decision isn't released within the period of time. But I think what the LPRT does is often will keep the hearing open, and that's how they effectively buy some more time. So either way, once the decision's in their hands, there isn't a lot parties can say about it at that point. But it could take a long time to have a decision.
Thank you.
I think that's the best expectation for everybody, that this could take a long time. Ms. Hyde, are you?
Yes, I am ready. Thanks for your
Want me to-
patience. You
Yeah,
should
you
get
bet.
the prompt to go into the waiting room right away.
Okay, so should we have the motion to go in camera first?
Oh, yes. Yes,
So I'll move the council go in camera under FOIP 27 sub 1A to receive information subject to legal privilege. And calling the question, those in favor? Opposed? We've already lost a couple of councillors, but that's still quorum. So we're going in camera.
Can you send me the invite again? Because I deked out too early and came back to vote, please.
Yes, I will. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. I will right away.
Thank you.
Hang on, sorry. Sorry, Joanna, it's not really obvious what to do here.
No problem. It's my fault. Do you want me to leave and then rejoin and then you can offer it to me, or no? Just let me know what you want
Try
me
this.
to do. Okay.
No, not now. Yes. Sorry, everyone who's watching this can hear us talk too. Gosh, I can select you and then my only option is to close all rooms. Sarah, if you're listening and know what to do. Let me just message Sarah.
Okay.
Sorry, Joanna. I don't know what
That's
to do when I'm
okay.
sharing my
It was the one
screen.
that bailed early. It was my fault.
Joanna, is there anything on your end for you to click to rejoin? I just show that you're not joined, but it's not giving me an option to join you.
No, I don't. Do you want me to leave the meeting entirely and then rejoin the meeting? Does
No,
that?
I might have to close the room and put you all back in again.
Okay, I'm so sorry. No, I
It's
don't.
okay.
There's nothing here. No, there's no options.
Yeah.
Feel like my mother. I'm hitting every button possible.
I know, I feel the same way, but I
Oh,
feel
here we
it's-
go. Join breakout room. Here we go.
Yay. Yeah, it was something she had to do. I can't, like I've already invited her, like there's nothing else I can do. I was thinking we could all, oh, I'm not on mute.
Okay, is everybody back? Looks like everybody's back. Great. So we will now move on to item D2, which is a verbal report on the Transportation Improvement Program 2020. Is that Mr. Asarte speaking? Yes, it is.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Hello.
I'll
For
just
some reason you appear 2 times on this screen.
got 2 computers to try to
Ah,
manage a technical
okay,
issue. So we'll see how this goes.
I'm very impressed.
Okay.
Yeah, got that screen.
All right. I will give this a try, see how it goes. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have a presentation for you today on data and updates related to the TIP 20 project. The agenda has us reviewing safety improvements, intersection capacity, and contextualizing performance with a look at our transportation goals, mode shift, and network-wide performance expectations. So starting with safety, it's a primary driver behind the design of the intersection. If our roads are safe and accessible, among many other benefits, we can expect to encourage a maximum number of people to walk and cycle. And this is part of our strategy to make room on the roads for us to drive when we want to and need to. On safety, I had the pleasure of speaking with one of our local driving instructors last week. And anecdotally, you know, through him, I had heard through one of his clients that he had some thoughts on the intersection, so I decided to give him a call. This gentleman has spent the last 20 years driving on our roads daily while teaching Canmore's young drivers to navigate this intersection. And so his feedback was very specific to the types of challenges that he had seen with his clients, with other drivers, and through his own driving experience. And what was remarkable for me is that through his unique perspective as an instructor, he was able to deconstruct each of the safety elements of the design and cite how it addressed each of the issues that he had observed historically. And he touched on all of the fundamental features of the intersection, the setback crossings, separation between phases for pedestrians and people driving, no left turns into oncoming traffic, medians protecting from oncoming traffic. These features have made the intersection much easier for him to teach to his students and address many of the safety issues that he had seen. He no longer has students panicking in the middle of the intersection. When it's green, they go, and when it's red, they stop. The intersection has other safety and accessibility features, narrow and constrained lanes offering more consistent speeds, elimination of stopping on crosswalks with near side signals, tactile plates at road entries, smooth transition for rolling and removing trip hazards, and it will soon have audible signals. So these features, sorry, I'm clicking between presentations. These features, they come as a package. They can't be selected a la carte. To have full phase separation between people driving, you need to keep people from driving through or parking in active crosswalks. Those need near side signals. To offer a separation of vulnerable road users, you create separate pathways and you need to set those back from the intersection. And for those setback crossings, you need to have those near side signals as well. So while it's generally intuitive why these safety features are important to keep road users safe, traditional design has conflict as a feature for so long, and so we haven't really questioned it historically. And to help illustrate how much design there is in the traditional intersection, we'll borrow this graphic from Transportation Association of Canada. The white dots on this graphic represent locations where there's conflict between people walking and driving. Black dots represent conflict between people driving. This is a basic one-lane intersection. Multi-lane intersections like ours would have a number of more conflict points. Conflict points are locations where property is typically damaged and where people are typically injured and where fatalities occur during normal operations of a traditional intersection. By isolating pedestrian movements from turn movements through signal phasing, we've removed collision potential with pedestrians that's inherent with traditional design, eliminating all of the white dots. Likewise, running left turns and right turns concurrently and then through movements without overlap, we can eliminate all of the conflict points associated with drivers turning and the black dots. And rounding out conflicts at a traditionally designed intersection, we have the challenging conditions faced by people wanting to cycle and being required to follow road rules when traveling through an intersection. You can see behind the arrows, this intersection actually only shows conflicts of cyclists moving up the page or moving up the page and turning left. There are 3 other directions that cyclists can travel, and so at least doubled the conflict points, which they haven't shown for clarity. To eliminate these dozens of conflict points, we provide cycling with the same space and protection as when walking, along with their own dedicated space. And this is a conflict dot free intersection through that design. This is showing some safety metrics from the past. We have collisions that have resulted in property damage on the left over the years. 2020, a construction year, there was a drop. In 2021, the year's not complete, and that reflects collisions before completion of the intersection. On the right is injuries as a result of those collisions. So with a new intersection design, this is a proven design, but it's a bit early to speak to the safety profile. Usually when you have a new intersection, you can expect a period of higher risk. To date, we haven't had any reported collisions in the intersection, so that puts us off to a good start. I'll close the safety section with a quote, which sums up the design philosophy of the intersection from our local driving instructor. So again, while the rationale for promoting safety and for health is important for the health of our community, and that's clear, people will walk, bicycle, and take transit in very high numbers if we offer safe and convenient spaces to do so. So as we look into the data here on capacity of the intersection, that will become clear, as is its role in the network. Performance from a traditional transportation perspective, travel times and delay can be managed by some combination of increasing capacity and managing volumes. So balancing those 2 points. Over the next section of slides, we'll look at data from a number of sources to contextualize where we're at and where we are headed. We'll start with total car trip volumes through the intersection. This is a daily report between July 1st and September 17th. We see a pattern here with the highest volumes on Fridays and overall volumes between 24,000 and 31,000 trips per day. The threshold under which we'll see minimal delay is 27,000 vehicles per day. Minimal delay is defined as you'll arrive at the intersection and travel through, or at most you'll wait a portion of a cycle signal before getting through. Up to 30,000, that's the threshold in which you'll experience moderate delay, meaning during the busiest periods of the day, you might have to wait for an additional signal cycle. This generally comes on 1 or 2 of the movements, the heaviest movements, and those movements can at times block other movements from entering the intersection. Reviewing the data, we see that this condition exists about 3.5% of operational hours, where we spend it above the normal operations line. This is a condition that's not unprecedented for a busy tourist town. However, we expect to be able to get that number below 1%, and that's going to help to address a couple of the frustrating operational issues that we see during peak times. And we can do this in the short term by increasing the capacity of the intersection. The signal phasing at intersections is controlled, operated by a controller that is housed in this cabinet. Most controllers allow for up to 16 distinct signal phases, and the controller has the ability to modify those phases to extend or reduce screen time based on volumes. That, in most cases, most intersections anywhere, is enough flexibility. However, with this intersection design and with the requirement for an additional number of phases for train preemption, which allow for traffic to flow while the tracks are occupied by a train, we end up using all of our controller capacity. And that controller constraint is limiting our ability at this time to optimize signals for the intersection design. For an illustration of how additional phases will help us, I'll refer back to the schematic. With our current configuration, it only takes a single pedestrian, shown with the smiley face, to trigger the pedestrian phase for both sides of the intersection. So they press a button on one side. Because we don't have enough phases in the controller, both sides get triggered at the same time. If we were able to add additional phases, we would get, in this example, an extra right turn. So over the course of an hour, that's going to mean a couple hundred extra vehicles or more just from this one optimization. Parts have been on order since last winter, but delayed due to supply chain issues. And that's required us to continue to operate with the older controller and really limit what we can do at the intersection at this time. Looking at a couple of these optimizations and analyzing for what we could expect for performance and capacity after upgrades, we would see it go from normal operations around 27,000 vehicles per day to approximately 30,000 vehicles per day. And this increase in capacity itself will serve travel demand for quite a number of years. And what about beyond that? There are many good reasons not to continue to push higher and higher capacities at this intersection. We've discussed the benefits of a more balanced transportation system at length over council's term and since the 2013 Integrated Transportation Plan, and they include social, economic, and environmental benefits that are core to our community values. We have prioritized these values over an ever-expanding vehicle network. Now, that hasn't meant at the expense of a functioning network for driving, but rather in support of it. And so for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the transportation rationale for targeting a maximum value, traffic value for this intersection. And that is going above 30,000 vehicles begins to break down the network. And there's no easy fix for it. There are 47 individual uncontrolled access points on Bow Valley Trail alone. Those each become difficult to turn in and out of. Traffic begins to back up in the town center, parking fills at commercial areas and throughout the downtown. The fixes for these types of network breakdowns are a combination of prohibitively expensive, require land that doesn't exist, and fundamentally will change the character of our roads from what you see in the image here to city-style 4 and 6 lane roads that tend to be dividers for cities and dead zones for activity. On the flip side, by targeting sub 30,000 vehicle peak days at Bow Valley and Railway, we can expect that the remainder of the network will perform well. Parking can be managed through the strategies in the Integrated Parking Management Plan, and we can enjoy the benefits of driving around easily in the community the vast majority of the time while avoiding the biggest of the negative impacts of prioritizing the car. So now we'll take a closer look at 3 of the primary ways we're managing demand on the network, making walking and cycling feasible for a greater proportion of trips, transit, and land use. Transit is bouncing back from pandemic lows. This is a busy graph, I won't dwell on it. We are still a ways off reaching our 2019 values. However, expect to get there as soon as the pandemic conditions ease. Through the intersection at present, transit travel, including other forms of busing, is around 1 or 2% of mode share. For 2030, we have a community-wide target of 5%. This slide shows volumes of walk and cycle trips using the TIP 20 intersection. Already in the first year of data collection, we can see very high volumes with peak use during our busiest days, including our long weekends. Average trips taken by pedestrians for the busiest summer months was approximately 2,100 and 1,200 trips by bicycle for an average around 3,300 trips per day. On the busiest days during peak periods, these counts represent approximately 8% of total mode share. And while the ITP envisions a peak season walk cycle share of 35% for all of the community, for the purpose of today's presentation, let's assume that this number reaches 12% and look where that takes us by 2030. This is just another interesting data point that shows the benefit of having our highest walk and cycle trips during our busiest days here in Canmore. And this is by taking a look at Spring Creek Drive. This year's September long weekend was the second highest travel weekend, most travel trips for the entire summer, but actually the lowest car travel weekend on Spring Creek Drive. And on that weekend, nearly 50% of trips recorded were people walking and cycling. And here it shows the blue line is the travel trips. So very, very high travel weekend, and the car trips, a very moderate amount. To reach 2030 targets, we have a number of opportunities through projects and initiatives in the capital plan and through operating pathway improvements, safety and accessibility improvements, ongoing transit enhancements, and continued complete street improvements on arterials. And so each of these projects is building on previous projects to enable that higher and higher walk cycle share. I'll talk a bit about land use. A couple policies on land use from the Integrated Transportation Plan refer to compact mixed-use development, managing parking supply through a number of initiatives in the Integrated Transportation Plan. And so I'll speak specifically now to the potential impact of additional commercial areas in Spring Creek Mountain Village and in Three Sisters that are currently planned and work is underway. Google has a neat feature where on the maps shown here on the left, you can look and see popular times for businesses. And for this particular major trip generator in our gateway, Fridays are as busy as it gets. If you take a look at Friday data from any of our counts, you can see a direct correlation. This is quite different than what you would see in Calgary, for example, where they have distinct AM and PM peaks correlated to work trips. Here we have daily traffic that's more like weekend traffic in a city centered around a lot of midday commercial trips, which is actually quite helpful for us. And another data point here, we're looking at Spring Creek Mountain Village traffic on Spring Creek Drive, and again, similar weekend traffic patterns throughout the week. And so if we were to have an additional commercial, presently there's a market plan for Spring Creek Mountain Village, a small grocer. We're looking at a larger commercial area being developed out in the next couple of years out in Three Sisters. We can estimate that there's going to be a certain proportion of trips on through the TIP 20 intersection that will reroute to those commercial areas. And doing that, we have a look at this graphic. Now I'll try to, with my pointer here, can you see that, Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can see with the blue line here is current travel, vehicle travel through the intersection. The green line is capacity. And then down here we have the car equivalent trips from walk, cycle, and transit, and the percentage share of those trips at the intersection for a particular year. This graphic projects out to 2030, and what it shows is that next year, we'll have an increased capacity at the intersection. We can expect 99% of the time or more traffic volumes to be below that level. As we see these commercial areas develop out and a proportion of vehicle trips routed from Deadman's Flats, Exshaw, Three Sisters, even Cougar Creek, Peaks of Grassy, there's a very clear correlation between the proximity and where people will travel. If we consider even a small proportion of trips on Railway Avenue to be rerouted, we can expect a decrease in travel demand. And with growth that would represent 1 in 5 new units of development out in 2030. So 20% more development driving trips on this corridor in 2020. We're still well below the intersection capacity, and that with relatively modest and achievable 14% non-vehicular mode share target. In summary, the TIP 20 project significantly increased the safety, comfort, and